Hi there and welcome to another episode of Editor's Notes with me, Cy Williams. I'm also here with Bailey and Lance. I'm the publisher of Hi Canada Magazine and Hi Europe Magazine. Now before I get started, please do me a favor, hit subscribe. It supports the channel more than you can possibly know. Okay, let's get going. A recent cannabis industry submission to the Cannabis Act review called for immediate financial relief and for governments to bring down the walls of stigmatization. Now, this press release came out on November 20, 2022 from the Cannabis Council of Canada, also C3, and their submission to the Cannabis Act legislative review is a public consultation, and it's calling on the Government of Canada to protect public health and safety gains of legalization, make the changes needed to create a financially sustainable legal cannabis industry, and end the government's stigmatization of legal cannabis that limits progress on the key public health aims that were originally intended with legalization. The submission underscored the urgent need for governments to address the financial liability of current market participants immediately through a moratorium on Health Canada regulatory fees and through federal and provincial governments to addressing the unpredictably aggressive excise tax and provincial distributor markups. The submission is available on the C3 website, cannabiscouncil.ca. Now, as the world leader in cannabis legalization, Canada is positioned to revisit its financial and regulatory approach to legal cannabis as planned. And this is from President and CEO of the Cannabis Council of Canada, Mr. George Smitherman. He also says, when cannabis legalization was conceived in legislation, the precautionary principle was applied deliberately and in many cases arbitrarily in ways that have contributed to re-stigmatization and frequently confounded the objective of competing with and eliminating the illicit market. This was one of legalization's key public health objectives. This is what Smitherman said. Now, what does stigma look like in the Canadian cannabis environment? Well, that's a good question. A retail store that you can't see into, suggesting some nefarious activity, for instance. A product you can't talk about, even to the adult who is considering a purchase. A format you can't offer because of an arbitrary decision on strength. A personal possession limit with arbitrary and uncorrectable perceptions. What about this? An excise tax on a constitutionally protected, recognized medicine. A bank account you can't get at a federally chartered bank. How about a lack of proactive record and expungence for simple possession? The current framework has been a financial success for governments and provincial monopoly distributors who apply markups, but it's been a bloodbath for the small guy, for investors of all sizes within the Health Canada licensed producers and processors framework. Meanwhile, highly regulated and taxed licensed players, often including retailers, are in a crisis situation due to unbridled competition from an illicit market that doesn't pay taxes, openly markets and sells unregulated cannabis, and seemingly attracts very little enforcement or enforcement interest. The legislative review is a needed opportunity to address the unintended consequences of the Cannabis Act and to make evidence-based changes that will enable the legal industry to be a better partner in helping achieve legalization's objectives, efforts to keep cannabis away from youth, protect public health, and keep the profits of cannabis out of the pockets of criminals. The time has come for for our governments to acknowledge Canadians' support for legal cannabis and to tear down the walls that prohibit consumers from accessing the information that they need to make informed choices about cannabis and cannabis-related products. This is from George Smitherman. Now, the C3 is calling on the Government of Canada to address 5 major priorities. Number 1, ensure the financial viability of licensed producers and processors by fixing federal, provincial, territorial excise taxes, government distributor markups, and for Health Canada to immediately end fees, regulatory fees, to 2.3% of licensed producer and processor revenues, 2.3%. Number 2, levy the playing field with the illicit market. Number 3, allow licensed producer and processors to provide consumers with evidence-based information on the effects of cannabis. Number 4, eliminate really costly nanny-state regulations. Number 5, strengthen patient access to medical cannabis. Now, as part of the Cannabis Act statutory review process, the Canadian Council of Canada, C3, presented the Cannabis Act Review Secretariat with a 30-page submission that included 37 recommendations to minimize harms, to protect Canadians, to promote education and awareness, to support informed choices, to create progress towards establishing a responsible supply chain, protect public safety, and increase access to cannabis for medical purposes. The submission's recommendations would reduce stigmatization and include a revise to the approach to the cannabis taxation, markups, and fees so that legal providers can be financially sustainable while being able to compete with the illicit cannabis industry, because right now their hands are tied. Also, increase the nature and availability of consumer-focused information about cannabis products by allowing cannabis companies and cannabis retailers to be able to provide to consumers evidence-based information about the effects of cannabis products and the harm reduction benefits of lower THC flower and non-combustible product. Non-combustible formats. Enforce the law on illicit cannabis industries. Allow cannabis companies to build brands to help attract the illicit cannabis consumer into the legal market. Revise the cannabis retail experience to support informed consumer choices. The current nanny state model, where window coverings drive stigma, products are behind the counter, and consumers' decisions are based on bud tender preferences. It really ignores the reality of cannabis consumers today and Canadians' acceptance of legal cannabis as a whole. Increase the 10 milligram THC limit on cannabis edibles to allow legal edible products to meet market demand and to replace illicit edibles and protect children from copycat illegal edibles mimicking popular candy. Allow patients to access untaxed medical cannabis in pharmacy settings so that patients can benefit from practitioner oversight and include medical cannabis in pharmacare. The resilience of the illicit market continues to threaten public health and safety objectives of legalization and the ability of Canada's legal cannabis industry to contribute to these objectives, added George Smitherman. He also said, while the Cannabis Act review is welcomed by C3, it is incumbent upon the Government of Canada to acknowledge the financial crisis facing Health Canada licensed producers and processors, and to make immediate changes that will create a sustainable environment for Canada's legal cannabis industry. We cannot wait for the outcome of the legislative review process for action from governments, George said. Mr. Smitherman said. So building on the success of the C3's Budget 2022 advocacy efforts on cannabis co-packing and the transfer of unstamped packaged cannabis between license holders or license holder, C3 is also hosting a webinar with the Canada Revenue Agency entitled C3 and CRA on Bill C32 Implementation, and it's happening on December 15th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Representatives from the CRA will be on hand to brief C3 members and other interested parties on the implementation of the co-packing service agreement and intra-industry product transfers. So time permitting, they're going to be having a question and answer session. So, if you're there, make sure you bring your questions with you. The webinar is open to all. So please check out the C3 website for what's going to be an absolutely informative and probably very engaging session. Okay, that's it for me today. Cy Williams, High Canada Magazine. Make sure you hit subscribe and like, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Editor's Notes with me, Cy Williams.